My name's Aria. I'm 32, and at my brother Mason's engagement dinner, I showed up in a new navy dress carrying champagne, hoping maybe for once I'd feel included. Instead, Mason smirked and pointed me to a folding chair by the trash can. Laughter followed. That was the moment everything I'd buried for years cracked open. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. The chair by the trash can wasn't a beginning. It was an ending. It was the final punctuation on a 32-year-long sentence that had been written in invisible ink. To understand the chair, you have to understand the silence that came before it. You have to understand the architecture of my family, a structure designed with one purpose, to support the weight of my brother Mason. Growing up, our home in suburban Ohio was a meticulously maintained stage. My mother kept it spotless, my father kept the lawn perfectly manicured, and I kept my feelings to myself. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath monument to normalcy. But inside, it operated on a different set of laws. The primary law was that Mason was the center of our solar system. He was bright, loud, and unpredictable, a star burning on its own chaotic energy. My parents, the devoted astronomers, spent their lives tracking his every movement, charting his every whim. I was a moon, silent and steady, existing only to reflect his light and maintain a stable orbit. My own gravity was never a consideration. I learned this lesson early. When I was 8 years old, I won the district spelling bee. It was the biggest thing that had ever happened to me. The final word was chrysanthemum. I remember the heat of the stage lights, the squeak of the microphone as I leaned into it, and the sound of my own heart beating in my ears. Chrysanthemum. The judge's smile felt like the sun coming out. I walked off that stage with a large blue ribbon and a small gold-colored trophy that felt as heavy and important as an Oscar. On the bus ride home, I held it in my lap, tracing the engraved letters of my name. Aria Thompson, first place. I imagined the scene when I got home. My mom would gasp and hug me. My dad would lift me onto his shoulders and call me his champion. The reality was quiet. I walked into the house and found my mom on the phone, a familiar frown on her face as she talked. She saw the trophy, gave me a quick thumbs up and a mouthed wow before turning her attention back to the call. No, I understand he's suspended, but you have to understand, Mason is a very high-energy boy. I placed the trophy on the exact center of the kitchen table, a silent offering. I waited. When my mom finally hung up, she was exhausted. The call had been about Mason getting into a shoving match at school. She sighed, ran a hand through her hair, and looked at my trophy as if seeing it for the first time. Oh, honey, that's lovely. What is it for? The spelling bee, I said, my voice small. I won. That's nice, dear, she said, her focus already drifting. That's very nice. Listen, can you be a sweetheart and take the chicken out of the freezer for dinner? I have to call your father about this mess with Mason. My father's reaction was a carbon copy. He came home, preoccupied with Mason's suspension. He saw the trophy, ruffled my hair, his standard gesture of benign acknowledgement, and said, "Good job, sport. Way to use your brain." Then he turned to my mom and the real conversation began. What do you mean suspended for 3 days? For a little pushing? It's ridiculous. I sat at the table, watching the two of them orbit Mason's latest crisis, my little gold trophy forgotten. It sat there for a week, a small island of my achievement in a sea of their concern for him, before I quietly took it to my room and put it on a shelf. It was the first time I understood that my successes were quiet. Personal things while Mason's failures were loud, public events that required the full attention of our entire family. This dynamic played out in 1,000 different ways. In 5th grade, I was cast in the school play. I had a supporting role, the quirky best friend, which meant I had dozens of lines to memorize. For weeks, the house was filled with me practicing my part, trying to get the comedic timing just right. Mason, who was in 7th grade, had been strong-armed by the drama teacher into being a non-speaking tree in the enchanted forest. He had to stand on stage for 2 minutes and hold his arms out like branches. My parents dutifully came to the opening night performance. They brought a camera with a huge telephoto lens. They arrived 5 minutes late, just as the enchanted forest scene was beginning. I watched from the wings as they took a dozen flash photos of Mason the tree. They whispered to each other, pointing him out proudly. And then, during intermission, before my big scene in the second act, they left. I saw them walking out of the auditorium. The next morning, my dad explained, we saw Mason's part, and it was getting late on a school night. I stood on stage that night, delivering my lines to the spot where they had been sitting, to 2 empty chairs. As we got older, the stakes got higher. When Mason was 17, He took our dad's new sedan out, got drunk with his friends, and crashed it into a telephone pole. The police brought him home. He was alive, miraculously unharmed. The car, however, was destroyed. I expected yelling, grounding for life consequences. What I saw was relief, followed by a strange masculine pride from my father. He walked away from it, Dad kept saying to our neighbors, his voice full of awe. The kid is tough. He called it a learning experience. Mason was grounded for 2 weeks, but it felt more like a vacation. My mom made him his favorite meals. My dad talked to him about handling your liquor man to man. The recklessness, the sheer stupidity of his actions, was reframed as a rite of passage. A year later, I graduated from high school. I was 16, having skipped a grade and taken extra classes to finish early. I was the class valedictorian and had earned a full academic scholarship to the University of Illinois. This I thought was undeniable. This was a success so big they would have to see it. There would be no phone call about Mason to distract them. I laid the acceptance letter, the scholarship certificate, and my valedictorian medal on the dining room table. A trifecta of achievement. My mom read the letter slowly. Her expression was unreadable. "Well, Aria," she said, folding the letter and handing it back, "you've always been in such a hurry. Just try not to burn yourself out." It wasn't a celebration. It was a caution. She saw my ambition not as a strength, but as a strange, slightly worrying compulsion. My dad was more direct. He looked at the scholarship amount and let out a low whistle. "Good," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "That's a lot of money we don't have to worry about now." My accomplishment wasn't a source of pride for them. It was a financial burden I had conveniently lifted. I had not earned their praise. I had simply made myself less of a problem. The pattern was set. Mason was a project, a constant source of drama and excitement that required their endless investment of time, money, and emotion. I was a utility, reliable, efficient, and utterly self-managing. You don't celebrate your electric company for keeping the lights on. You just expect it, and you only notice it when it fails. My entire childhood was an exercise in learning how to be the perfect utility. I never failed. I kept the lights on, and in doing so, I learned to live in the dark. Leaving for college should have been an escape. Moving to Chicago, 4 hours away from my family's gravitational pull, felt like I was blasting off to my own planet. I was starting my career in finance, building a life, becoming my own person. But I learned quickly that distance doesn't sever a tether. It just stretches it thin. The role of the invisible daughter simply evolved. I became the family's long-distance, 24/7 crisis hotline and, more importantly, its First National Bank of Aria. It started, as it always did, with Mason. He was 23, still living in our hometown, cycling through a series of almost careers. He was almost a real estate agent, almost a personal trainer, almost a bar manager. The calls for money became a regular feature of my life. I remember the first time with perfect clarity. I was in my tiny studio apartment, eating a bowl of instant ramen, feeling proud of myself for sticking to the strict budget I'd created. My first big bonus had just cleared, and it was sitting in my savings account, a beautiful, growing number that represented safety, independence, and the future. My phone rang. It was Mason. His voice was slick with the manufactured charm he deployed for favors. "Hey, Aria!" My favorite sister. "How's the big city?" After a few minutes of forced pleasantries, he got to the point. "So funny story. My car needs a new alternator, and my landlord is being a real jerk about rent being on time. I'm just in a temporary bind, you know how it is. Could you possibly spot me like $500? I swear I'll pay you back next Friday when I get paid." Every instinct screamed no. It was my money. I had worked for it. I had plans for it. But then a lifetime of conditioning kicked in. My mother's voice echoed in my head. "He's just finding himself. You're the one who has it all together. It's your job to help." My sense of responsibility was a muscle they had trained so well it contracted automatically. "Okay, Mason," I said, the words tasting like defeat. "I'll send it. You're a literal lifesaver, Aria. Seriously, I owe you big time." I logged into my banking app, my hand shaking slightly. I typed in the amount, saw the healthy number in my savings account shrink, and hit confirm transfer. The immediate reply from Mason was a one-word text, the X. He didn't pay me back on Friday. He didn't pay me back ever. A month later, another call. His power was about to be shut off. He needed $300. Then, 2 months after that, he needed $600 for a security deposit on a sure-thing job. Each time, the story was different, but the script was the same. A crisis, a promise, and my reluctant compliance. My savings account became a slush fund for his irresponsibility. The dream of a down payment on a condo began to feel like a childish fantasy. It wasn't just the money. It was the emotional load. When my father's small contracting business hit a rough patch, he didn't tell me. He was too proud. My mother did, in a frantic, tearful phone call late one night. He's going to lose everything, Aria. The business, the house. He just sits at the kitchen table staring at the wall. He won't talk to me. That weekend, I drove the 4 hours back to Ohio. The tension in the house was so thick I could barely breathe. My dad was a ghost, gray and silent. I spent 48 hours at their dining room table, surrounded by shoeboxes full of crumpled receipts and overdue invoices. I built spreadsheets. I created cash flow projections. I untangled a year's worth of bad bookkeeping. I treated my family's finances like a corporate restructuring, methodically and impersonally, because if I allowed myself to feel anything, I would have shattered. At the end of the weekend, I presented them with a plan. It was a stark, ugly plan that involved deep cuts and selling off some equipment, and it required a cash injection to stay afloat. I looked at my father's defeated face, at my mother's tear-streaked cheeks, and I knew what I had to do. I went online and liquidated a small stock portfolio I had been building since I started working, my future fund. I transferred $10,000 to their account. My dad finally looked at me, his eyes full of a terrible mix of shame and gratitude. "We'll pay you back every penny, Aria," he whispered. "You're such a good girl. A good girl. Not a smart, capable woman who had just saved them from financial ruin. Not a daughter who had just sacrificed a significant piece of her own security for them. A good, quiet, useful girl." They never paid me back, of course. The business stabilized, and the loan was never mentioned again. It was absorbed into the family ledger as another one of my silent contributions. My role as the family manager solidified. My mother was diagnosed with a thyroid condition, and navigating her healthcare became my unpaid part-time job. I was the one on the phone with the insurance company, arguing about coverage. I was the one who set up her appointments and reminded her to take her medication. My lunch breaks were spent on hold with pharmacists. A typical call from her would go like this. "Hi, honey, I'm at the pharmacy. They're saying my copay is $90. That seems high, doesn't it? Can you just put it on your card for now? It's just easier." It was always just easier for me to handle it. I became the default planner of holidays, the buyer of gifts, the fixer of technical problems. I was a remote employee of my own family, and my compensation was the continued draining expectation that I would always be there to carry the weight. My own life in Chicago felt distant, like a movie I was watching. I had to cancel dates because Mason had a last-minute emergency. I passed on weekend trips with friends because I couldn't justify the expense after funding my family's latest crisis. My phone was a leash. Every time it rang with a call from home, my stomach would clench in a familiar knot of anxiety and resentment. I was 32 years old, successful by any objective measure, but I was not my own. I was a resource, a line of credit, a safety net, and I was fraying, thread by invisible thread. Hope, I've learned, is a liar. It whispers stories of a future that will be different from the past, and it makes you believe them, even when all the evidence points to the contrary. For a few weeks before the dinner, I let myself believe the lie. It started with a phone call from Mason. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in the middle of a complex financial model at work. His name flashed on my screen, and the usual wave of preemptive exhaustion washed over me. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some foolish impulse made me answer. "Ari!" His voice was buoyant, electric with a kind of joy I hadn't heard from him since we were kids. "You will not believe this. I asked Brooke to marry me." She said yes. For a moment, the cynicism melted away. Brooke was a wonderful person, a bright, warm-hearted architect who seemed to genuinely see something special in my brother. She was a stabilizing force in his chaotic life. "Oh my God, Mason, that's incredible," I said, a real smile spreading across my face. "Congratulations." We talked for a few minutes about the proposal, about the ring, about how happy he was. It was a normal, pleasant conversation. It was so normal that I let my guard down. And that's when he made his move. "So, listen," he said, his voice shifting subtly from celebratory to transactional. "Brooke's parents are great, but they're kind of traditional. They want to have a proper engagement dinner, you know? A chance for the families to meet and celebrate." And I was thinking, well, you're so good at this stuff. Planning things, finding classy places. I was wondering if you could just handle it. There it was, handle it. The two words that defined my existence in my family. Handle the bills, handle the crises, handle the planning. I was the family's executive assistant. My mind screamed, "Say no. Say you're busy. Say, congratulations, Mason, you're an adult. You can use Google and a phone just like I can." But my heart, that stupid, treacherous organ, whispered something else. This is different. This isn't a bailout. This is a celebration. It's for Brooke. If you do this, if you make it perfect, they'll have to see you. They'll have to acknowledge what you do. Mason will toast you. Brooke's family will see what a capable, loving sister you are. This is your chance to finally earn your seat at the table. Hope, the beautiful liar, won. Of course, Mason, I heard myself say, my voice sickeningly eager. I would love to. I'll take care of everything. I dove into the project with the obsessive focus I usually reserved for my most important clients. I wasn't just planning a dinner. I was architecting my own acceptance. I spent hours scouring articles about Chicago's best restaurants, cross-referencing them with reviews and menus. I wanted something that screamed special occasion, a place that would impress Brooke's parents, who I knew were accustomed to a certain level of refinement. I created a spreadsheet comparing venues, prices, and available dates. I finally found it, a rooftop restaurant in the River North neighborhood called Celeste. It had a glass-enclosed private terrace with breathtaking views of the city skyline. It was elegant, modern, and undeniably impressive. It was also staggeringly expensive. I sent Mason the link. His response was a one-line text. Looks sick. Book it, I called the restaurant's event coordinator. Her name was Chloe, and she had a smooth, professional voice. We discussed menu options, wine pairings, and dietary restrictions. Then came the part I had been dreading. To reserve the private terrace for a party of 10, Chloe said, we do require a $500 non-refundable deposit. I hesitated, my mouse hovering over my online banking portal. $500 was my grocery and utility money for the month. It was not an insignificant amount. I thought about asking Mason to pay it, but I knew what would happen. There would be excuses, delays. The perfect date would be lost. The perfect moment would slip away. If I wanted this to be perfect, I had to control it. I had to handle it. No problem, I said, my voice betraying none of my anxiety. I read off my credit card number. As I did, I imagined the night, the twinkling lights of the city, my family, happy and relaxed, Mason raising a glass and saying, and I couldn't have done this without my sister Aria. It felt like a fair trade. I was paying for a memory. I was paying for my seat. In the days leading up to the dinner, my hope swelled into a full-blown fantasy. I called my mom to tell her about the restaurant, and she just said, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Is there valet parking? Your father hates looking for a spot." I ignored the pang of disappointment. I even ordered flowers for the table, a lush arrangement of white roses and hydrangeas, and had them billed to my card. The night of the dinner was unseasonably warm for an October evening in Chicago. The air was crisp and clear. I took my time getting ready, performing a ritual of transformation. I soaked in a hot bath, painted my nails, and did my makeup with unusual care. I had bought a new dress for the occasion, a simple navy sheath that was both elegant and professional. When I looked in the mirror, I saw the woman I wanted them to see. Successful, confident, put together. The woman who could handle it. I grabbed the expensive bottle of champagne I'd bought as a celebratory gift and headed out the door. The cab ride was a blur of city lights and nervous energy. I rehearsed conversation starters in my head. I would ask Brooke's father about his law practice. I would compliment her mother on her necklace. I would be charming, witty, and indispensable. When I stepped off the elevator onto the rooftop, I could already hear them. It was a sound I knew well. My family in full performance mode. My dad's booming laugh, my mom's high-pitched giggle, Mason's loud storytelling. I followed the sound to the private terrace and my breath caught in my throat. It was even more beautiful than the pictures. The city skyline was a glittering tapestry behind them. The table was set perfectly, my flowers serving as a stunning centerpiece. They were all there, bathed in the soft glow of the string lights, champagne flutes in hand, looking like a perfect family from a magazine. My heart swelled with a feeling so intense it almost hurt. I did this, I thought. I made this happen. This perfect moment was mine. I took a deep, steadying breath, fixed a bright smile on my face, and walked toward them, the heavy bottle of champagne feeling like an offering. "Hi, everyone!" I called out, my voice full of a genuine joy I hadn't felt in years. "Sorry I'm late. The traffic was terrible." The laughter stopped. 10 heads turned in my direction. The smiles on their faces didn't so much disappear as they did reset. My dad's smile tightened into a grimace. My mother's eyes darted nervously from me to Mason. Brooke looked confused. And Mason looked at me with pure, unadulterated annoyance, like I was a stain on his perfect evening. He gestured to the long, beautifully set table, where 10 chairs were filled by 10 people. My parents, Brooke's parents, Mason's 2 best friends with their partners, and of course Mason and Brooke. There was no empty seat. I waited for him to explain, to say there had been a mix-up, to call a waiter over to add another chair. Instead, he pointed. He pointed to a dark corner of the terrace, a desolate little space next to a waiter's service station and a large, gray plastic trash can. Sitting there, all by itself, was a single, sad-looking metal folding chair. He gave me a smirk, a cruel, dismissive twist of his lips. "Sorry, Aria," he said, his voice loud enough for the whole terrace to hear. "I guess we miscounted. This table is for family only." Time didn't stop. It fractured. The moment Mason said, "family only," the world shattered into a million sharp, glittering pieces of humiliation. I was standing there, holding a ridiculously expensive bottle of champagne, with a smile dying on my face. The sound that followed his words wasn't overt, cruel laughter. It was something far worse, a symphony of social discomfort. One of Mason's friends coughed into his napkin. His girlfriend suddenly found the skyline intensely fascinating. My mother took a sudden, violent interest in the contents of her bread plate. My father took a large, noisy gulp of his champagne, his eyes fixed on the far-off horizon. No one met my gaze, except Brooke. She looked horrified, her mouth slightly agape, a silent protest forming before Mason put a hand on her arm, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of command. "Stay out of this." I was frozen. My brain was a frantic blizzard of white noise. He can't be serious. This is a joke. A mean, terrible joke, but a joke. In a second, he's going to laugh and pull up a chair. But he didn't laugh. He just stood there, the smirk cemented on his face, waiting for me to comply, waiting for me to take my designated place. My body moved before my mind did. It was pure survival instinct, a desperate need to end the excruciating tableau of my public shaming. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, the other diners on the rooftop, the waiters gliding past, all witnessing my demotion. My feet, heavy as lead, carried me across the stone tiles. As I passed the main table, my arm moved mechanically, placing the bottle of champagne near my father. "Congratulations," I managed to say. The word came out as a strangled whisper. It was swallowed by the thick, awful silence. Then I was at the chair. It was a grim utilitarian object, cold and metallic. It wobbled slightly when I sat down. It was tucked into a dark corner, a social Siberia. To my right was the service station, where busboys would come to loudly dump ice into water pitchers. To my left was the large gray trash can. It smelled faintly of stale wine and discarded lemon rinds. A few feet away, the main kitchen door swung open and closed with a rhythmic whoosh and clang, each time hitting me with a blast of hot, greasy air. This was my seat at the table. A waiter appeared at my side, a young man with kind, confused eyes. His job was to be invisible, but my situation was so bizarre it had made him visible. "Ma'am?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. "Are you with the party?" I couldn't speak. The lump in my throat was the size of a fist. I just nodded. "Would you like to see a menu? Can I get you a drink?" he pressed, trying to impose some sort of normalcy on the insane situation. I glanced over at the family-only table. They had moved on. The conversation had tentatively started up again. Someone had opened my bottle of champagne, and they were topping off their glasses. They were drinking my peace offering while I sat in exile. "Just water," I whispered. "Please." He returned a moment later and placed a glass of water on the floor next to my chair because there was no table for me. There was nowhere else to put it. He gave me a final, pitying look and retreated. And then, the long watch began. For 2 hours, I sat on that metal chair and watched my family celebrate. It was a uniquely agonizing form of torture. I wasn't gone. I was just partitioned off, close enough to see and hear everything, but walled off by an invisible barrier of their indifference. I watched them eat the 3-course meal I had so carefully selected with the event planner. I watched them pass the bread basket. I listened to my father tell one of his long, rambling stories about Mason's supposed athletic prowess in high school, a story I had heard 100 times. I watched my mother, a master of social graces, charm Brooke's parents, laughing at their jokes, making them feel like the center of the universe. At one point, she got up to use the restroom. Her path took her directly past my chair. For a terrifying second, our eyes met. I saw a flicker of something in her expression. Guilt? Shame? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She looked away, quickened her pace, and hurried past without a word. She walked right by me as if I were a piece of furniture. My mind started to dissociate. To survive the moment, I had to leave my body. I became an anthropologist, observing a strange, cruel tribe. I noted their customs, their social rituals. I watched them perform the act of being a happy, loving family. But the performance was for each other and for their new audience, Brooke's parents. I was not part of the intended audience. I was backstage, sitting by the garbage. This detachment was a shield, but memories kept piercing it like arrows. Sitting in that chair, I remembered the empty seats at my school play. I remembered my spelling bee trophy on the kitchen table. I remembered driving home in the middle of the night to bail them out of another crisis. Each memory was a log on a fire of rage that was slowly starting to burn through the numbness. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't a mistake. This was the logical conclusion of my entire life with them. They had never seen me as a person, only as a function. I was the fixer, the planner, the financier, and tonight my function was complete. The dinner was planned. The deposit was paid. They didn't need me anymore, so they put me with the trash. The final act of my humiliation came with the toasts. Brooke's father stood and gave a warm, lovely speech. Then my own father stood, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke of his pride in his son. Finally, Mason got to his feet, holding his champagne flute high. He smiled, a wide, confident grin that I had once mistaken for charm. "I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight," he began. "It means more than I can say to look around this table and be surrounded by the people who matter most in the world. To my amazing parents, and to my incredible new parents," he nodded at Brooke's family, "and to all of our friends who are our chosen family. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for being our foundation." His eyes swept the table, making meaningful contact with each and every person sitting there. His gaze passed right over my dark corner without a flicker of recognition. I didn't exist. In the official narrative of his life, the one he was telling at his engagement dinner, I was a deleted scene. The toast was the breaking point. The pain and shame of the last 2 hours coalesced into something new, something hard and cold and clear. The hope I had carried for so long had finally, blessedly, died. And in its place, something much stronger was born. The good girl, the quiet fixer, the invisible daughter, she died right there on that wobbly metal chair. And I didn't even mourn her. After Mason's toast, a strange sort of peace settled over me. The kind of peace that comes after a devastating storm has passed, leaving a landscape of ruin that is, at the very least, quiet. The hope was gone. The hurt had burned itself out. What remained was a cold, hard clarity. I was no longer a participant in the evening's drama. I was simply an observer, waiting for the play to end so I could go home. The main table was loud again, their laughter and conversation floating across the terrace, but it sounded distant now, like a television playing in another room. They moved on to dessert. I watched from my corner as the waiters brought out delicate plates of chocolate lava cake and creme brulee, things I had discussed in detail with Chloe, the event planner. I remembered debating between the raspberry coulis and the salted caramel sauce. It felt like a memory from another person's life. I decided I would leave. I wouldn't make a scene. I wouldn't say a word. I would just stand up, walk to the elevator, and disappear. It was the role they had written for me, after all. The ghost who handles the logistics and then fades away. I would give them that one last performance. I sipped my now warm water and waited for a lull in the conversation, a moment when I could slip out unnoticed. That moment never came. Instead, I saw him, the young, kind-eyed waiter who had brought me my water. He was walking toward the main table, moving with a practiced, unobtrusive grace. In his hand, he held a black leather bill folder. My stomach didn't lurch. My heart didn't pound. I simply watched, a detached spectator curious to see how the final act would unfold. He approached the table and stood for a moment, waiting to be acknowledged. My father and Brooke's father were deep in a conversation about golf. Mason was trying to make Brooke laugh by putting a dollop of whipped cream on her nose. It was my mother who finally noticed the waiter. She gave him a small, tight smile and gestured toward Mason. The waiter stepped toward my brother. "Sir," he began. But Mason cut him off. He didn't even look at the waiter. He didn't look at the bill. He was still focused entirely on Brooke, basking in her affection. With a casual flick of his wrist, a dismissive wave of his hand in my general direction, he delivered the line that would change everything. "Oh, just put it on Aria's card," he said, his voice breezy and confident. "She's handling the whole thing." The words traveled across the terrace and hit me with no force at all. It was utterly, completely predictable. It was the final, logical step. Of course, this was my ultimate function. To pay for the party I wasn't invited to. I saw my parents both nod slightly, a silent confirmation. This was normal. This was the arrangement. Brooke's parents looked a little surprised, but quickly masked it with polite smiles, clearly assuming this was some pre-discussed family agreement. How generous of his sister, their expressions seemed to say. The waiter stood frozen for a second, a brief flicker of confusion on his face. He glanced from the laughing, oblivious man at the table to the silent woman sitting by the trash can. He was a professional. He was not paid to get involved in the strange, sad dramas of his customers. He had an order. He turned. The walk from the main table to my corner was only about 30 feet, but it felt like it took an hour. Every sound on the rooftop seemed to fade away, replaced by the soft, rhythmic scuff of the waiter's shoes on the stone tiles. With every step he took, the spotlight that had been shining on the main table swiveled and followed him, until it landed hot and bright on me. Conversation at the table faltered and died as, one by one, they turned to watch this bizarre transaction. My father's jovial expression hardened. My mother's smile vanished, replaced by a look of nervous apprehension. Mason finally turned away from Brooke, his face a mask of irritation. What is taking so long? Why is he making this so weird? The waiter reached my chair and stood over me. He looked deeply uncomfortable. He was no longer just a server. He was the messenger, the unwilling bearer of the final insult. "Ma'am?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He opened the leather folder and held it out for me. Inside, nestled in a small pocket, was a long white slip of paper. I didn't need to read the details. I knew what it was. "The final total is $3,218.41, he said, enunciating each word with pained precision. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw an apology. "Your brother said, should I run that on the card you used for the deposit?" The number was obscene. It was breathtaking in its audacity. $3,000. More than my monthly rent. Enough for a flight to Europe. It was the price of my own execution. And in that moment, as the entire rooftop held its breath, I looked from the waiter's apologetic face to the bill, and then I slowly, deliberately, lifted my head and looked at my brother. A strange thing happened. The fear was gone. The shame was gone. The lifetime of conditioning that screamed, "Just pay it, don't make a scene, be the good girl," went silent. The rage I had been feeling earlier had cooled and solidified into something unbreakable. It was a column of steel running up my spine. For the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely powerful, because I was the one with the credit card, and they had just made the fatal mistake of assuming I would use it. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I let it hang in the air, forcing them all to sit in the uncomfortable truth of what they had just done. I held my brother's gaze, and I watched the irritation in his eyes curdle into confusion, and then into a dawning flicker of fear. He was starting to realize that the script had changed, and he didn't know the new lines. The world waited on my answer. The waiter, my family, Brooke's family, even the strangers at the surrounding tables who were now shamelessly watching the drama unfold, they were all waiting for me to play my part. They were waiting for the quiet, reliable daughter to do the quiet, reliable thing, to nod, to hand over the card, to swallow the cost, just as I had swallowed every other hurt. I let the silence stretch until it was taut and humming, like a high-voltage wire. I watched the confidence drain from Mason's face, replaced by a sweat sheen of panic on his forehead. I saw my father's jaw clench so hard a muscle jumped. My mother was twisting her napkin into a shredded mess in her lap. They had built this prison of expectation for me, and for 32 years I had dutifully stayed inside. But in this moment, I realized the door had been unlocked the entire time. All I had to do was walk out. I broke my gaze from Mason and looked up at the young waiter. I gave him a small, calm smile. "No, thank you," I said. My voice was even, clear, and loud enough to carry across the terrace. And then I delivered the 3 words that detonated the rest of my life. Not my table. A collective intake of breath seemed to suck the air from the rooftop. It was a sound of pure shock. Brooke's eyes went wide and she put a hand to her mouth. Mason's face, which had been pale, now turned a blotchy, furious red. My father was the first to recover. He leaned forward, his voice a low, menacing growl meant only for me, but in the dead silence, everyone heard it. "Aria, don't be ridiculous. This isn't the time or the place." It was his go-to line, the one he used to shut down any inconvenient display of emotion. I turned my calm gaze to him. "Then when would be the time, Dad? And where would be the place? Should I have brought it up when you took $10,000 from my savings to save the business? Or maybe I should have scheduled a meeting to discuss the fact that I've been supplementing Mason's income for the last decade." His face went slack with shock. He had assumed those were secrets, transactions hidden by a veil of family shame. He never imagined I would speak of them, out loud, in front of Brooke's wealthy, respectable parents. My mother jumped in, her voice a frantic, pleading whisper. "Aria, please! You're making a scene! What will the Lawrences think?" "I don't know, Mom," I said, turning to her. "What do you think they would think if they knew that the person who planned this whole beautiful evening, who found this restaurant, who paid the deposit, and who ordered the flowers, was told she couldn't sit with the family because she wasn't family enough?" Mason finally found his voice. It was sputtering, full of rage and disbelief. What the hell, Aria? You said you would handle it. That was the deal. The deal? I asked, and a real, genuine laugh, sharp and humorless, escaped my lips. There was no deal, Mason. There was just you once again asking me to clean up your mess. And I did. I planned the party. The rest of this, I gestured to the bill in the waiter's hand, is for the people who actually sat at the table. I was told very clearly that this was for family only. So, the family can pay for it. The poor waiter was trapped. He looked helplessly between me and the table, a neutral party caught in the crossfire of a war that had been raging for 30 years. Sir, he said to Mason, his voice trembling slightly, we do need to settle the bill. All eyes went back to Mason. He looked like a cornered animal. He had no money. He had no plan. His only plan had been me. You're doing this to ruin my night. He finally exploded, pointing a finger at me. You've always been jealous of me. You can't stand to see me happy, so you have to pull a stunt like this and make it all about you. The accusation was so absurd, so perfectly in character that it didn't even sting. The old Aria would have crumpled. She would have believed it. She would have wondered, am I jealous? Am I a bad person? But the woman sitting by the trash can just felt a profound sense of pity for him. His only defense was to attack. No, Mason, I said, and my voice was softer now, filled with a sad finality. I'm not jealous. And this isn't about me. This is about you. This is about all of you. My gaze swept across my parents. This is about a lifetime of you treating me like a service, not a person. I was your planner, your banker, your fixer, but I was never your family. You made that perfectly clear tonight. I stood up, the legs of the metal chair scraping loudly against the stone. The sound was a declaration. Tonight, I'm just a guest. And I've already done enough. This proves it. I looked at my father, whose face was a thundercloud of fury. I looked at my mother, who was now openly crying, her face buried in her hands. I looked at Mason, who was just staring at me, speechless with a rage that had rendered him impotent. They had no more moves to make. I had taken away their only weapon, my own compliance. For the first time, I was the one setting the terms. And the terms were, I was done. The final desperate volley came from Mason. As I stood there, purse in hand, ready to leave, his rage finally boiled over into pure, unfiltered venom. You're a miserable, pathetic accountant, he spat, his voice cracking. You have nothing. No husband, no kids, just your stupid spreadsheets. You're just trying to ruin my life because your own life sucks. Every word was designed to be a scalpel, to cut me open and strike at my deepest insecurities. He was taking aim at the parts of my life that I myself had sometimes questioned. The quiet solitude, the long hours at work, the relationships that never seemed to last because I was always on call for my family. A year ago, even an hour ago, his words would have crippled me. I would have felt the truth in them, however twisted, and it would have shattered my resolve. But I wasn't the same person who had walked onto that terrace. The woman who had been publicly stripped of her familial identity was immune to his insults. His words felt like pebbles thrown against a brick wall. I looked at him, really looked at him. And what I saw was not a monster but a weak, terrified boy who had just lost his lifelong safety net and was lashing out in a panic. And for the first time I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, not even pity, just a vast, empty distance. No, Mason, I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. I'm not trying to ruin your life. I'm starting mine. I turned my back on him. I didn't look at my mother's tears or my father's fury. I allowed myself one final, brief glance at Brooke and her parents. Brooke was looking at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and something else. Dawning understanding. Her parents looked like they had just witnessed a multi-car pileup and were profoundly grateful not to be involved. I gave them a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture that said, I'm sorry you had to see that. It was a final act of grace that I didn't owe them, but which I gave to myself. Then I walked. It was the longest walk of my life. A straight line from the corner with the trash can, past the long table of my former family, and toward the elevator that represented my escape. It wasn't a hurried retreat. It was a deliberate, measured procession. Each step was heavy with the weight of the 32 years I was leaving behind. I could feel their collective stare on my back, a physical pressure. I could hear the frantic, whispered conversation igniting in my wake. I didn't look back. The world seemed to move in slow motion. The city lights of Chicago, which had seemed so full of promise when I arrived, now looked like a beautiful, indifferent galaxy that I was finally free to explore on my own terms. The gentle clinking of glasses from other tables, the soft murmur of strangers' conversations. It was the sound of a world that existed outside the suffocating bubble of my family, a world that was waiting for me. I reached the elevator and pressed the down button. The small, illuminated arrow felt like a sign from the universe. Going down, getting out. As I waited, I could see the reflection of the terrace in the polished brass doors. I saw the tableau I had left behind, a group of beautifully dressed people at a stunning rooftop restaurant, frozen in a state of crisis, a massive unpaid bill sitting on their perfect table like a ticking bomb. And I saw my own reflection, a solitary figure standing apart, bathed in the soft light of the elevator call button. For the first time, I looked whole. The elevator doors slid open with a quiet ding. I stepped inside, turned around, and watched the doors slide shut, closing off the scene of the crime. As the car began its smooth descent, I was finally alone. The silence was absolute. I leaned my head back against the cool, mirrored wall and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I learned to spell chrysanthemum. And then I began to cry. They weren't the hot, painful tears of shame or sadness. They were cleansing tears, tears of release. Each one felt like it was washing away a year of quiet resentment, of swallowed words, of deferred dreams. I was crying for the little girl who just wanted her parents to be proud of her trophy. I was crying for the teenager who did everything right and was never celebrated. I was crying for the young woman who gave away her future, piece by piece, to people who just took it for granted. I was mourning the life I had lost by being their daughter. By the time the elevator reached the ground floor, the tears had stopped. I wiped my eyes, took a deep breath, and looked at my reflection one last time. The woman looking back at me was not the same one who had ridden this elevator up, full of foolish hope. Her makeup was slightly smeared. Her eyes were red, but she was standing straight. She looked free. I pushed the heavy glass doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the cool Chicago night. The sudden blast of city air, a mix of car exhaust, street food, and the faint scent of Lake Michigan, felt like the first breath of a new life. The sounds of traffic, the wail of a distant siren, the bass thumping from a nearby bar. It was the chaotic, vibrant soundtrack of my own existence, no longer drowned out by my family's constant noise. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, with no destination in mind. I pulled out my phone, not to check for messages, but to do something I hadn't done in years. I opened a map, looked at the city laid out before me, and asked myself a simple question: where do I want to go? I walked for hours that night with no destination. I just let the city swallow me up. I walked past bustling bars and quiet, darkened office buildings. I walked along the river, watching the tour boats glide by like illuminated ghosts on the dark water. For the first time in my adult life, my phone was not a leash. It was in my purse, and I had no desire to look at it. I knew what would be waiting for me: a digital avalanche of guilt, anger, and manipulation. For tonight, I wanted only silence. When I finally got back to my apartment after midnight, the silence was waiting for me there too. It was a clean, peaceful quiet that filled my small space. I made a cup of tea, sat on my couch, and finally I picked up my phone. It was exactly as I had expected. A war zone. There were 19 missed calls. 7 from Mason, 12 from my mother, and a flood of text messages. The first ones were from Mason, sent in rapid-fire succession from the restaurant. "Where the hell did you go? You can't just leave me with a $3K bill. Answer your phone right now. You are unbelievable. You completely embarrassed me in front of Brooke's family. They think our family is trash. This is all your fault. You ruined my engagement." The final text from him had been sent about an hour ago. It was simpler and somehow more pathetic. "Mom is crying. I hope you're happy." Then there were my mother's messages, a masterclass in passive-aggressive guilt-tripping. "Aria, honey, please call me. We're all very worried. This is just a big misunderstanding. Let's not let things get out of hand. Your father is so angry. I've never seen him like this. You've humiliated him. How could you do this to your brother on his special night? After all we've done for you, please, just call me. We need to fix this." And finally, a single blunt force text from my father, sent just before I arrived home. "You will call your brother, apologize, and you will pay him back for the dinner. This is not the daughter we raised." I read through the messages one by one. I read them a second time. I was waiting to feel the old familiar sting. The guilt, the shame, the desperate need to fix this. But it never came. Reading their words was like reading a case study about a dysfunctional family. I could see the tactics, the emotional blackmail, the complete and utter lack of self-awareness. But I felt no connection to it. They weren't my emotional triggers anymore. They were just words on a screen from people I used to know. With a strange sense of calm, I put my phone on silent, plugged it into charge, and went to bed. I slept for 10 straight hours, a deep, dreamless sleep for the first time in years. The next day, the real fallout began. I ignored the continuing barrage of calls and texts. Around noon, an unknown number called. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello? Aria, it's Brooke. Her voice was hesitant, fragile. I am so sorry. I'm calling to apologize for last night. For everything. What Mason did, what your parents did. It was unforgivable. I was so shocked I didn't know what to say, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. It's not your fault, Brooke, I said, and I meant it. It is, she insisted. I'm going to be part of that family. I should have stood up for you. There was a pause, and then she asked the question that unraveled everything. Aria, I have to ask. After you left, things got ugly. Mason told my father that you had offered to pay for the whole dinner as your engagement gift, and that you were just being dramatic and making a scene because you were jealous. But you said some things about loaning your dad money for his business. Was that true? The old Aria would have protected them. She would have downplayed it. Oh, it was just a small loan. A long time ago, it was nothing. It was my automatic reflex to smooth things over, to preserve the carefully constructed facade of our family. But the old Aria was gone. Yes, Brooke, I said, my voice steady. It's true. I gave my father $10,000 about 5 years ago to keep his business from going under. It was my savings for a down payment on a condo. I didn't stop there. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I just stated the facts one after another, like a witness giving testimony. I've been paying Mason's bills for the better part of a decade. Rent, car repairs, cell phone bills. I put the $500 deposit for the restaurant on my personal credit card. I never expected to be paid back for any of it. I just expected for one night to be treated like I was part of the family. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. All I could hear was Brooke's quiet breathing. Oh my God, she finally whispered. He told us you had a lot of money and you liked helping out. I have a good job, I said, but I'm not wealthy. I just learned to be responsible because no one else was. Thank you for telling me the truth, she said, her voice sounding strange and distant. I have to go. And she hung up. I didn't know what would happen, but I knew I had just armed her with the truth. The rest was up to her. 2 days later, she called me again. The wedding is off, she said, her voice flat but firm. I confronted Mason with what you told me. He tried to lie, but he's a terrible liar. He finally admitted it was all true. He didn't even seem to think it was wrong. He just kept saying, that's what family is for. She took a shaky breath. Then my dad called your dad. I don't know what was said, but I know my father. He's a lawyer. He hates being lied to more than anything. He told your dad that he would not allow his daughter to marry into a family with such a profound and disturbing lack of character and integrity. Those were his exact words. A part of me felt a grim sense of vindication, but a larger part just felt sad. I had never wanted to destroy Mason's happiness. I had just wanted to claim my own. The worst part, Brooke continued, her voice breaking slightly, is that Mason isn't even mad at himself. He's mad at you. He and your parents are furious that you aired the family's dirty laundry and poisoned me against him. They don't see that they did this to themselves. Her words confirmed what I already knew. They would never change. They would never see their own part in the destruction. In their story, I would always be the villain, and for the first time I was okay with that. Because I was no longer a character in their story, I was busy writing my own. The weeks following the implosion were quiet. I blocked my father's and Mason's numbers. I kept my mother's, not out of a desire for reconciliation, but out of a lingering vestigial sense of duty, in case of a true emergency. She left a few more tearful, manipulative voicemails, which I deleted without listening to the end. The silence from them was a relief, a balm on a wound that was finally being allowed to heal. I worked, I saw my friends. I started looking at condos again, my old dream feeling new and possible. Then, one Sunday afternoon about a month later, my apartment buzzer rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I pressed the intercom button. Hello, Aria, it's Mom. Her voice was small, tentative, stripped of its usual frantic energy. My first instinct was to say I wasn't home, to hang up, to keep the wall I had built around myself intact. But curiosity won. I buzzed her in. She appeared at my door a moment later, looking older and more fragile than I had ever seen her. She wasn't dressed up. She was in jeans and a simple sweater. In her hands, she held a large casserole dish wrapped in a kitchen towel. I brought you my lasagna, she said, holding it out. It was a peace offering. Lasagna was her apology dish, the thing she made when she knew she was wrong but didn't have the words to say it. I stood aside and let her in. She placed the lasagna on my kitchen counter and stood there awkwardly, wringing her hands. The silence stretched. Your father is still very angry, she began. And Mason? Mason is Mason, she sighed, a deep, weary sound. Brooke is gone. For good. He lost his job last week. He's moving back home. I just nodded, offering no comfort, no solution. I was no longer the fixer. She looked around my small, neat apartment, her eyes lingering on the photos on my bookshelf, pictures of me with friends, on trips, smiling, pictures that didn't include her. I've been thinking a lot, she said, her voice barely a whisper, about that night, about everything. We did a terrible thing to you, Aria. We always have. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were filled with a genuine, heartbreaking sadness. We treated you like a safety net, like you were so strong you didn't need anything from us. We just took, and we never saw you. We were wrong. The words I had waited my entire life to hear. We were wrong. The little girl inside me wanted to cry and rush into her arms, but the woman I had become just stood there. I knew this apology was a beginning, not an end. It was a crack in the foundation, but the house was still standing on 30 years of toxic soil. Thank you for saying that, Mom, I said, and my voice was kind, but it was also distant. She understood. She knew she wouldn't be staying for dinner. She knew one lasagna couldn't fix a lifetime of neglect. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes, and a few minutes later, she left. I didn't rush to forgive them. Forgiveness is a complicated thing, and I needed to give it to myself first. But for the first time, I felt seen. In the months that followed, I started building a new life, one that was entirely my own. I took a trip to Italy, something I had always dreamed of but never had the money for, because my money was always being diverted to their emergencies. I ate pasta in Rome and drank wine in Florence. I sat at tables for one, looking out at ancient, beautiful cities, and I never once felt lonely. I felt free. I came back and I finally bought my own place. A small, one-bedroom condo with a balcony overlooking the city. My table is a small, simple wooden one. Sometimes I eat there with friends, and our laughter fills the space. Most of the time I eat there alone. I sit with my food, my thoughts, my future. It is my table. I chose it. I paid for it. And it has exactly one chair, unless I decide to add another. There is no one to point me to the corner. There is no trash can. There is just me, finally, at the head of my own table. If you've ever been treated like you didn't belong at your own family's table, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Because no one deserves a chair by the trash can.